The Good Ride, sucking less every year for over 10 years. Gnu Mullair. Anti-gravity. Lost round-nosed fish. So here we are with three boards. Two I own and one I have possession of right now that I hadn't ridden in powder much or at all. And there was just this great storm. I was there literally all day, and nobody was up. It was like 1.5 feet of thick, wet Pacific Northwest snow, courtesy of the lovely Mount Bachelor. And when my kids are asleep, there's always something that reminds me of them, no matter what's going on, no matter where they are in this house. They've just taken it over. But I digress. I got to ride a bunch of different boards, but I took out three kind of what I would call free ride boards. They're, a little directional, a little more tapered than your average like double ender all mountain board, that are more like twin-ish, directional twin, tip and tail, same width. These all have a little taper going on, a little more nose, a little more tail. And I really wanted to just see how they did in powder, especially powder like this. This is just such a good test because 1.5 feet of thick, wet snow really can make a board work if it's not a good powder board. So let's get into it. We got the LibTech Lost Round-Nosed Fish. We got the Gnu Mullair from Gnu Mullair. And then, the GNU Evo Collab, the Antigravity. And on this same day, I rode 5 other boards. I was just taking a couple laps on each one and just going back. Sorry for the crappy footage, but it was just super low light. The GoPro wasn't hanging, and the snow just, no matter what I did, the snow just kept hitting the lens and just making it look crappy. So it was actually better than it looked. But I got to run on a few of these and compared these to some really amazing powder boards, just kind of see where they stood. And I've ridden almost all of the other Good Ride favorites in powder, like the Flight Attendant, like the Pick Your Line, and like a lot of really good powder, like a couple feet of powder, thicker Sierra powder, but still really good. And Pick Your Line in all kinds of powder, the XV in powder, so many other like free ride favorites that I've owned or ridden in powder. So I really kind of wanted to give these a taste, and I gotta start out with the Mullair. I was a little concerned with the setback on board, but a little excited that there's a little bit of early rise now going on in the nose. And there's a taper in the tail. There's a bigger nose than tail, as you can see here. And check the on the table review. But that setback on board did prove to be kind of problematic. It just didn't feel as floaty as so many other of my free ride favorites. But conversely, it's one of my all-time favorites of that free ride group when it comes to going out and carving up groomers. And I think it just really has a cool feel to it there. And I think it comes at a little bit of a sacrifice to how it rides powder. It just felt way more centered than I thought it would. It didn't quite just have that easy float. And I actually had one moment where I got in some really tracked up snow. I was trying to look at my GoPro to wipe the lens, and I actually cartwheeled on it, and I haven't done that in years because mainly when I'm riding powder, I'm riding these just like these floaters, with some sort of rocker going on, and I actually cartwheeled in the thick chopped up snow. Now, is this a bad board in powder? No, not at all. It's very good. It's still better than a lot of all mountain boards that I've ridden. It's just not quite in the class as the other free ride boards. They're kind of like here. It's kind of more like here-ish, you know, it's not quite. And then there's these, you know, kind of like short, fat, surfy, some of these surfy boards and powder boards are way up here, but it's still good. And, you know, there's a lot further down you can go, but, you know, you can do a lot worse. But that kind of surprised me. The anti-gravity, I rode the 56. I have the 59 and the 56. I chose the 56 because that board I liked better than the 59. So if I were to get a board, I would own the 56. So for my specs, I liked that the best. So that's why I rode that instead of the 59. And this thing did pretty well. It was like almost there with the Mullair. What do you know? A little rhyme. But it just really didn't, neither of these boards, you know, these boards took some back leg work. This one was just the next level up. This is right there with all my other, like a lot of my other free ride favorites that I've tried in deep snow. And unfortunately I took this out last, but then I got it out the following day, just for a run or two. I hiked in the morning a few hours before the resort opened at Mount Bachelor, went and did the cone and did it with the Spring Break Tree Hunter 161 and the Jones Mind Expander 158. You can see that review on those pages in comparison. And then when the resort opened, I wasn't as tired as I thought my out of shape ass would be. Just don't have the engine yet, early season. So I just went out on the lib for a few runs and had a pretty good time in more untracked powder. And even in that day, I could just tell the float was better in, you know, the choppy, tracked up, thick powder. But then I got it in some lighter, a little fluffier, but still kind of thicker powder, about the same depth. And this just floated so much better. And it's right there. It was kind of like starting to bridge the gap between these boards and the other boards I rode, like the Yes Optimistic, the Rome Powder Division 153, Moontail, the Gentem Stick Chaser High Performance, then the Rossignol Sashimi 156, and then of course the super floater, the Jones Mind Expander. And those boards were definitely a level up, but this was a level up from these boards. This was kind of like, you know, it felt like it was hanging with boards like, you know, like the Rossi XV, or like, you know, like the Yes Pick Your Line, or some of those boards. It was kind of more in that class of board, maybe not as floaty. And sometimes this hybrid rocker can feel a little weird. Like it feels like the nose is kind of doing that, even though there's rocker here. So, but it's like coming down a little bit, but it didn't really feel that. And just all the setback on board with this, you know, chopped tail, and you know, so there's a little extra float than you would think from, if you're measuring from the bottom to the, you know, set all the way back. And the stance width, I had mini discs, so I was kind of set here and here, which was super low, you know, far back on board, and it floated really well. I'd have no problem if, you know, if this was my only board and this was my powder board too. Although, you know, when you get this out on groomers and you get this out on groomers, it's just a night and day difference. If you love to carve, then it's all about the Mullair. If you like a more playful, forgiving board, and not as fast, if you like carving and speed, this is the one. If you know, like a more playful board. But what was really surprising about this Lost Roundnose Fish is when you ride it more centered and you play around it, rides switch really well, it butters really well, it's fun, and then you can get surfy. It's kind of like the Roundnose Fish on the surf side. It just does a lot more than you would think for what it is, and that's why I love this board. But you know, when I'm in a carvy, perfect groomer mood, or the snow's a little harder, I'm gonna want to take this out. Not quite the powder board I was hoping it to be, but still an amazing board and still so recommendable on so many levels. The anti-gravity did a great job too, and is really floaty and really easy. And although although it's C3, it buttered and played around really well, and you can see the review coming soon for this. So I don't want to give too much away, but you know, it's got a little bump of early rise in the nose, C3, but it's buttery, it's playful. It's kind of like the lost round nose fish. It can do a lot of different things. It's like, it's got a free ride shape, but it's got kind of like a mountain freestyle flex, and it can kind of do a lot more things than you would think it would. But it can carve pretty well, and it's fun. It's a little locked in, a little catchy for how mellow the flex is, but that's the C3, you know, the mostly camber profile. But in terms of float, you know, it was hanging there with the Mullair, and it did a lot better than I thought it would for being, you know, for having such minimal taper. I think it has less taper than the Mullair and less taper than the round nose fish, and has a lot of camber, and you know, you can see it's like the nose isn't as elongated, and the tail isn't as chopped and minimized as these two, yet it was still very close to the Mullair, and I thought that was pretty cool. So definitely can work, but it's not amazing. It was some work off the back leg. So there you have it. That's just kind of a comparison of 3 boards from Mervin that I got out on some powder with.